The first snow of winter fell silently over Blackwood Ridge, coating the small town in a deceptive blanket of purity. Detective Eliza Morgan stood at the edge of the frozen lake, her breath forming ghostly shapes that dissipated into the darkness. 3 days ago, local librarian Catherine Walsh had vanished without a trace. Tonight, they'd found her car abandoned near this remote spot, its driver's door ajar, keys still in the ignition. "Nothing on the perimeter, Detective," Officer Davis called, trudging through the snow toward her. "No footprints leading away from the vehicle." "That's because the snow came after," Eliza replied, her eyes scanning the tree line. Something about this place felt wrong. "What brings a librarian to an isolated lake at night in the middle of November?" Davis shrugged. "Maybe she wasn't alone." Eliza nodded, the uncomfortable theory already forming in her mind. Catherine Walsh, 32, single, respected member of the community, had kept to herself. No enemies, according to everyone they'd interviewed. But Eliza knew better than most that people kept secrets, and Blackwood Ridge had more than its fair share. "Bag everything in the car and get the dive team here at first light." The station was quiet when Eliza returned, most officers having gone home hours ago. The small town rarely saw serious crime. A few break-ins, domestic disputes, teenagers caught with alcohol. Missing persons were rare, and the shadow of the last one still hung heavy over the department. 5 years ago, another woman had disappeared. They never found her. Eliza pinned Catherine's photograph to the board, smiling, auburn hair neatly styled, glasses perched on a narrow nose. Next to it, she placed a map of Blackwood Ridge, marking the lake where they'd found the car. "You're here late," the voice startled her. Chief Bennett stood in the doorway, coat draped over his arm, looking tired. "Just organizing my thoughts," Eliza responded, turning back to the board. "Don't get too obsessed with this one, Morgan. Sometimes people just leave." "With their keys in the ignition?" Bennett sighed. "All I'm saying is, don't make this personal. Not after what happened with the Keller case." Eliza stiffened. The Keller case, the one that had nearly destroyed her career in Boston before she'd retreated to this small town. A serial killer she'd chased for 2 years, always one step behind. They'd caught him eventually, but not before 7 women had died. "This is different," she said firmly. "I hope so." Bennett paused at the door. "Oh, and Morgan, the mayor's called twice. Catherine Walsh is his wife's cousin. He wants updates." Perfect. Political pressure was the last thing she needed. By morning, the lake had revealed its secret. Catherine Walsh's body was recovered from the water, weighed down with rocks inside her coat pockets. The preliminary examination showed bruising around her neck, consistent with strangulation. She hadn't drowned. She was dead before she entered the water. Eliza stood in the morgue, staring at the pale face that until recently had greeted patrons at the town library. "Time of death?" she asked the medical examiner. "Based on body temperature and decomposition, I'd say between 48 and 72 hours ago," Dr. Patel replied. "But the water makes it difficult to be precise." Eliza nodded, her attention drawn to something unusual. A small puncture mark on Catherine's wrist, nearly invisible against her pale skin. "What's this?" Dr. Patel leaned closer. "Injection site, perhaps. I'll run a tox screen." Back at the station, Eliza added the new information to her board. A deliberate killing, not a random act of violence or a robbery gone wrong. The killer had injected Catherine with something to subdue her, strangled her, then driven her car to the lake and disposed of her body. Officer Davis appeared with a cardboard box. "We've got Catherine's laptop and phone from her apartment. Tech is working on them now. Find anything else of interest at her place?" Everything was neat. No signs of a struggle, but Davis hesitated. There were a lot of books on local history, pages marked, notes in the margins. Seemed like she was researching something. Eliza's interest piqued. "What kind of local history?" "Mostly about Blackwood Asylum. You know, the old psychiatric hospital that closed down in the 80s. Everyone in town knew about Blackwood Asylum. The imposing Victorian building stood abandoned on the hill overlooking the town, a grim reminder of less enlightened approaches to mental illness. Local teenagers dared each other to break in, despite the no trespassing signs and the frequent police patrols. "Get me those books," Eliza said. The mayor's office was opulent compared to the rest of the town's municipal buildings. Matthew Caldwell had inherited wealth and married more. His family had practically founded Blackwood Ridge 3 generations ago. "Detective Morgan, thank you for coming." Caldwell stood from behind his desk, offering his hand. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and imposing. "Please, sit. I understand Catherine Walsh was your wife's cousin," Eliza began. "Yes. Rebecca is devastated. They were close as children, though they drifted apart in recent years." The mayor's face betrayed no emotion. "I want to be clear. I expect this case to be handled with the utmost discretion. With all due respect, sir, discretion isn't my priority. Finding Catherine's killer is, of course." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I simply meant that Blackwood Ridge is a small community. Rumors spread quickly. Panic isn't helpful to anyone. Was Catherine working on anything specific at the library recently? Any research projects? A flicker of something? Surprise? Concern?" crossed the mayor's face before he composed himself. "I couldn't say. Rebecca might know." As Eliza left, she noticed a photograph on the wall, a younger Caldwell standing before Blackwood Asylum, breaking ground for what was supposed to be a redevelopment project that never materialized. Catherine's research materials proved illuminating. The librarian had been investigating patient records from Blackwood Asylum, particularly from the 1970s. She'd made connections between several patients who had died under mysterious circumstances, all young women, all under the care of the same doctor, Edward Winters. More disturbingly, Catherine had compiled a list of 5 women who had gone missing from Blackwood Ridge over the past 20 years. The most recent was Jennifer Miller, the case Chief Bennett had referenced, the one they never solved. Eliza worked late into the night, piecing together the connections. Dr. Winters had retired from the asylum shortly before it closed. According to Catherine's notes, he had continued to live in Blackwood Ridge until his death 10 years ago. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Davis stood there with a flash drive. Found something on Catherine's laptop. She'd been exchanging emails with someone using an anonymous account. They were sending her information about the asylum. The emails revealed that Catherine had been corresponding with a former nurse who had worked at the asylum. The nurse claimed to have witnessed Dr. Winters conducting unauthorized experiments on female patients, injecting them with experimental drugs, then documenting their reactions. When she'd threatened to report him, she was fired. Most chilling was the nurse's claim that Winters hadn't stopped his experiments when the asylum closed. He'd simply found new subjects. "I need to find this nurse," Eliza told Davis. "And I want to know who inherited Dr. Winters' estate after he died." The answer to the second question came more quickly than expected. Dr. Winters had left everything to his only child, a son from a brief marriage who had taken his mother's maiden name, Matthew Caldwell. The asylum loomed against the night sky, its broken windows like vacant eyes watching Eliza approach. She hadn't waited for backup, perhaps unwise, but the puzzle pieces were falling into place too quickly. Catherine had discovered the connection between Mayor Caldwell and the doctor who had experimented on women. She'd been getting too close to exposing a decades-long pattern of abduction and murder. The front door was locked, but a side entrance yielded to Eliza's pressure. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint and abandoned medical equipment. She made her way to the basement, following the directions in Catherine's notes. The nurse had mentioned a hidden laboratory where Winters conducted his most secretive work. If evidence still existed, it would be there. The basement corridor stretched ahead, doors leading to storage rooms and what might have been cells. At the end, a heavy metal door stood partially open. Eliza drew her weapon before pushing the door wider. The room beyond was not what she expected. Unlike the rest of the asylum, it appeared to have been recently used. A desk held modern computer equipment. Shelves lined the walls, filled with journals and medical supplies. In the center stood an examination table with restraints at the corners. I was wondering when someone would find this place. Eliza spun around, gun raised. Mayor Caldwell stood in the doorway, remarkably calm for a man facing an armed detective. "Matthew Caldwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Catherine Walsh." Caldwell smiled. "You don't understand what's happening here, detective." "I understand plenty. Your father experimented on women at this asylum. When it closed," he continued, "abducting women from town. You inherited his hobby." "My father was a visionary," Caldwell said, stepping into the room. "He discovered something remarkable, a compound that could enhance psychic abilities. The mind's potential is vast, detective, but largely untapped. So you murdered women to continue his work?" "They were test subjects," Caldwell corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "Catherine was different. She was getting too close, contacting Nurse Evans. I couldn't allow her to expose my work." "Where's the nurse now?" "Helen?" Caldwell's smile widened. "She won't be troubling anyone. She should have stayed away from Blackwood Ridge." Eliza realized with horror that the fifth missing woman on Catherine's list, the one before Jennifer Miller, was named Helen Evans. "It's over, Caldwell. Step against the wall." Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket. "You feel it already, don't you? The drug I exposed you to when you entered. Aerosolized, tasteless, odorless. My father's formula, improved upon." Eliza's vision began to swim. Gun felt impossibly heavy in her hand. "What did you do to me?" she managed, fighting to stay upright. "The same thing I've done to all my subjects, given you the gift of expanded consciousness. Some don't survive the process, I admit. Their minds fragment." Eliza fired, but her aim was off. The bullet struck the wall behind Caldwell. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor, her weapon clattering away. "Don't fight it, detective. Embrace the evolution." Darkness encroached on her vision. Eliza fumbled for the panic button on her radio, the one she'd activated the moment she'd entered the asylum, the one that had silently summoned every available officer to her location. Distant sirens penetrated her fading consciousness. Caldwell's face contorted with rage as he realized what she'd done. "You've ruined everything," he hissed, moving toward her with murderous intent. With her last reserves of strength, Eliza swept Caldwell's legs from under him. He fell hard, his head striking the corner of the metal examination table with a sickening crack. The room spun around her as the basement door burst open, officers flooding in with guns drawn. Chief Bennett's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Morgan, what happened here?" Eliza fought to stay conscious, pointing weakly at Caldwell's prone form. "Careful, drug, in the air." The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Davis pulling gas masks from a backpack, distributing them to the officers as they secured the scene. 1 month later, Eliza stood once more at the edge of the frozen lake. The case was closed. Caldwell had survived his injury, but would spend the rest of his life in prison. His detailed records had led them to the remains of all 5 missing women, including Nurse Evans, bringing closure to families who had waited years for answers. The toxicology report had identified the compound in Eliza's system, a complex drug that temporarily altered brain chemistry. She'd been lucky. The exposure had been minimal, the effects temporary. She placed flowers at the edge of the lake, a memorial for Catherine Walsh and the others who had died in Caldwell's pursuit of his father's twisted legacy. Some shadows, however, would always remain. Like and subscribe, because some mysteries shouldn't stay buried in the shadows,